I was halfway through chewing a piece of charred octopus when she said it. No emotion, no warning, no shift in her voice. Just that one sentence. Perfectly clear, perfectly devastating. He didn't mean to kiss me. That's it. That's what she said. I didn't drop my fork. I didn't gasp. I didn't flip the table or accuse her of anything. I just stared at her, chewing like an idiot, while every cell in my body froze in place. It was so matter-of-fact, she could have been commenting on the wine. The worst part? She didn't look guilty. She looked tired. Tired, like someone who's been carrying a secret for too long and finally decided it wasn't worth the wait anymore. I didn't ask who he was. I already knew. That's the part that still makes my ears ring. I knew. I knew when she started taking her runs earlier in the morning, not because it fit her schedule, but because he worked at the cafe across the park. I knew when she switched her perfume, the one she said gave her headaches, to something fruitier. He once told her she smelled like a plum orchard. I only know that because I read their texts after pretending I needed her phone to call AAA. I knew when she added more spinach to her smoothies because he was into health. When she laughed at my dumb jokes with a slight delay, like she was deciding if I deserved the laugh. When she stopped using the we word. When everything between us became polite. The sentence she said at dinner was just the end of a performance I didn't realize I was the audience for. I folded my napkin, placed it gently beside my untouched cocktail, and stood up. I didn't say a word. Not because I was calm, but because if I had spoken, I would have screamed. That's the beginning. But what happened after I walked out? That's where it all truly begins. Because what I didn't know yet was that this kiss wasn't the worst of it. Not even close. I didn't go home that night. I didn't go to a bar. I didn't even drive for a while. I just sat in my car with the engine running, staring at the dark reflection of myself in the windshield like it might explain something I couldn't put into words. It was the way she said it that haunted me. He didn't mean to kiss me. No apology. No fear. Just soft delivery, like a weather update. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt erased. That's the only way I can describe it. Like someone had hit the backspace key on our entire relationship, and I was the only one still watching the blinking cursor. An hour later, I found myself parked in front of her old art studio, the one she hadn't used in almost a year. She claimed it was too far, but it was only 15 minutes from our place. She used to love that place. The smell of oils, the mess on the floor, the way she'd lose track of time sketching faces from memory. But then, one day, she stopped going. Said she was done with that phase. I still had the key. I didn't have a plan when I opened the door. The studio was cold and stale, like something sacred had been sealed off without a funeral. Her easel was still in the corner, half covered by an old flannel. Paintbrushes stiff with dried pigment stood in a mug that said, "I draw, therefore I overthink." I walked slowly, trying not to touch anything, as if her ghost might still be here and get offended. I don't know why I started looking around. Curiosity, maybe. Or some part of me still searching for proof that this wasn't as bad as it seemed. I found the shoebox in the bottom drawer of her supply cabinet. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't even locked. Just sitting there with her handwriting on the lid. Reference materials, I assumed. That's what she always called her photography cutouts or old magazine faces she used for practice. But the box was heavier than paper. Too heavy. I opened it. Inside were Polaroids. Dozens. Some black and white. Some blurry. Some cropped so tight you could only see fingers or fragments of skin. And all of them, every single one, had a note attached with dates. Some went back over a year. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. There were pictures of people I didn't recognize. Men in coffee shops, arms brushing across tables, intimate glances caught mid-blink. A hotel room door with a keycard still in the lock. A blurry rearview mirror shot of someone adjusting their collar. And then, I saw me. One Polaroid. Just one. Tucked near the bottom, as if it had been thrown in as an afterthought. It was from last summer. I was sitting in our backyard, shirtless, watering the basil she planted and immediately forgot about. I remember that day. It was hot, and she brought me lemonade. She laughed when I spilled some on my shorts. But in the photo, there was no warmth. No love. Just a cold distance in the way it was framed. Like I was a stranger in her documentary. Like I was being watched, not remembered. I stared at that photo for a long time. Then I noticed the note clipped to it. It said, "Control." That was the only word. Nothing else. No context. I put the photo back in the box, closed it, and sat down on the cold tile floor. My stomach turned like I was going to be sick. I felt something rising in me. Not anger, not sadness, something worse. Doubt. Not just in her. In myself. What had I not seen? What else had I missed? The sentence at dinner wasn't the end. It was a breadcrumb. And now I had a trail. I didn't sleep that night. I laid on the pull-out couch in my brother's basement, watching the ceiling and trying to understand what kind of person collects Polaroids of strangers like they're cataloging emotions for sale. That box was still sitting in my passenger seat. I hadn't dared to bring it inside. I treated it like it might explode if left alone too long. But even worse than the box itself was the fact that I'd never noticed it was missing from our life, that she'd had a whole second world tucked inside an old paint cabinet, and I'd been too focused on buying the right oat milk to see it. Around 4:30 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I got out of bed, grabbed the box from the car, and dumped the contents out across the floor. I arranged the photos in rows like evidence, like I was preparing to interrogate people I didn't even know. That's when I saw him. Not in just one picture, but five. 5 different angles. Different locations. Always the same guy. Early 40s maybe. Dark hair, square jaw, slightly crooked smile. In one shot, he was sitting in a diner booth. In another, he was looking out a window holding a paper coffee cup. There was one where he was walking a dog. And the last one made me feel like my lungs inverted. It was him at the art studio. My wife's studio. Same easel. Same wall paint. Same half-finished portrait I remember her abandoning in frustration 2 years ago. And there he was, standing next to it, looking down at something in his hand. A key. To the studio. And on his wrist, a red watch. Bright, unmistakable, and ugly. Something no one could forget. I suddenly remembered something stupid and small. 6 months ago, she told me someone had broken into the studio and moved things around. She said nothing was taken, but she didn't feel creatively safe there anymore. She said it with glassy eyes. She blamed the neighborhood. She blamed rising crime. She told me to let it go. She never mentioned the man with the red watch. For a second, I thought maybe this guy was an ex. A friend. A model. But then I noticed a timestamp on one of the photos, not handwritten like the others, but from a cheap digital sticker label. It read April 22nd for 18 p.m. April 22nd was our anniversary. That was the day we were supposed to have dinner at the sushi bar downtown, but she canceled last minute, claiming she had a stomach migraine. I ordered takeout. She stayed in bed all evening with the lights off. So why was he at her studio that day? The next morning, I drove back to the building. The studio lease had been in her name, but the landlord knew me. I made up a lie about wanting to reactivate it and asked if anyone else had used the space recently. He shook his head and said no one had the key but us. That didn't exactly help. If he had a key and he wasn't on the lease, that meant she had given it to him. Or maybe he took it. Back at my car, I started flipping the Polaroids again, desperately searching for anything else to latch onto. That's when I found the one that changed everything. A group shot. 3 people. Him, Darla, and a woman I didn't recognize. They were standing in front of what looked like a house, maybe somewhere rural. A cabin, based on the wood paneling and moss on the roof. They were smiling. But Darla's smile wasn't forced, like the one she gave me lately. This was something else. Something that looked like freedom. And the woman, the unknown woman, had a notebook in her hand. A notebook identical to the one Darla used to sketch in when she couldn't sleep. It wasn't until I zoomed in on the edge of the photo that I noticed something else. A license plate. Partial. Faded. But just enough to track. That night, I sent the image to a friend I hadn't spoken to in years, someone who worked in DMV systems. I knew it was a long shot, but if I could even get the county, I could follow the trail. He didn't ask questions. Just texted me 2 hours later. Upstate. Bingham area. Looks like a cabin rental property, but private owner. That was all I needed. Because now I had more than a question. I had a location. And something told me, if I drove there, I'd find out that this story wasn't about a kiss. It wasn't even about cheating. It was about something deeper. Something deliberate. I waited until the middle of the week to drive to the cabin. I don't know why. Maybe I was afraid I'd find nothing. Maybe I was more afraid I'd find exactly what I thought I would. Either way, I packed a duffel bag like I was staying the night, though I had no intention of doing so. I don't even know why I grabbed the bag. Instinct, maybe. Or self-preservation. Like I'd need something to ground me if my whole perception of reality shattered again. The drive to Bingham took just under 5 hours. The roads got quieter the closer I got. Strip malls gave way to farmland, and farmland eventually gave way to long stretches of trees with no signs, no cell towers, no people. Just the occasional tire swing or mailbox rusting under years of neglect. I kept checking the GPS like it might suddenly lose its signal and abandon me out here with nothing but a full tank and questions. The property didn't have a gate. Just a long gravel path that forked off the road like a forgotten limb. No signage. No house number. If I hadn't been looking for it, I would have driven past without ever knowing it was there. But the moment I turned in, something in my chest started pressing against my ribs like it wanted out. The cabin was tucked behind a wall of pines. It looked exactly like the photo, small, weathered, hunched like an old man trying to stay warm. The windows were dark. No cars. No signs of life. I killed the engine and sat for a moment. Listened. Nothing but wind and the rhythmic tick of my cooling engine. Then I got out and walked up the path. The wood porch creaked under my weight, loud enough to make me flinch. I looked through the front window. The glass was dusty, but I could see faint outlines inside. A couch, a table, a bookshelf with only one item on it. A single red mug. My first instinct was to knock. My second instinct was to leave. But then I tried the doorknob. It wasn't locked. I hesitated, one foot already turning back toward the car, but something pulled me forward. A dull voice in my head whispering. If she lied about this, what else did she lie about? The door swung open with the dry groan of wood on wood. The cabin smelled like old cedar and extinguished candles. Inside, everything was too neat. Like it had been reset, not lived in, but prepared. A single blanket folded over the arm of the couch. Coasters stacked in perfect symmetry. A kettle on the stove with no dust on it. This place had been used. Not abandoned. Used recently. I walked slowly through the living space, taking in every detail. Nothing personal. No photos. No clutter. Like whoever stayed here didn't want to leave a trace. Then I saw the spiral-bound notebook sitting on the table. Same brand Darla always used. I flipped it open and immediately recognized her handwriting. But this wasn't sketches or grocery lists. This was dialogue. Pages and pages of dialogue. Scripted conversations. Some labeled with initials I didn't recognize. Others were transcribed, like someone had written them after they happened. At least I thought they were transcripts, until I read one labeled Dinner Scene, Revision 3. The dialogue was almost word for word what she said to me 2 weeks ago. He didn't mean to kiss me. Pause. It just happened, and I felt like I was outside my own body. Pause. Tilt head slightly. Avoid eye contact. She had written instructions next to the words. It wasn't just something she said. It was something she rehearsed. Suddenly the air in the room changed. Like I wasn't alone. I turned sharply, but there was no one there. Just the silent space pressing in, holding its breath. I kept flipping. More scenes. More emotional confessions. Some with stage directions. One labeled Garden Argument had a margin note. Try crying, but don't overdo it this time. This wasn't a diary. It wasn't therapy. This was a script. And she had been performing for me. I closed the notebook with shaking hands. That's when I noticed the folder underneath. Inside were printed photos. Some I recognized from the shoebox. Others were new. But they weren't Polaroids. They were high-res, professional, and they all had timestamps and subject IDs. Men, women, public places, coffee shops, park benches, hotel lobbies. Always shot at a distance. Always unaware. Then something clicked in my brain so fast I nearly dropped the folder. I recognized one of the men. He was in my workplace building. Not from my company, but from the consulting firm on the floor below. We'd shared an elevator before. Said hi. I remember because he always wore novelty socks and once complimented my tie. And there he was, printed, labeled, timestamped. Subject 44B. Suddenly, the man with the red watch didn't seem like a lover. He seemed like a collaborator. Or a handler. And my wife? She wasn't just cheating. She was documenting. Curating something. Or maybe someone was curating her. I didn't leave the cabin until after dark. I sat there for hours, barely moving, just going over the documents, one page at a time, trying to make sense of something that clearly wasn't meant to be understood by someone like me. There were codes, color-coded folders, numeric tags. Some were labeled Subject A3, Emotional Reaction Patterns. Others were titled more plainly, eye contact metrics, unscripted responses, sleep cycle notes. It read like some sort of behavioral experiment. Only the subjects weren't rats or volunteers. They were people I recognized. One of them was my coworker's wife. Another, I swear, used to be my high school gym teacher. The more I looked, the more the walls started closing in. This wasn't about cheating. This wasn't about betrayal. This was something else entirely. Darla hadn't just been rehearsing scenes. She was testing them. Testing me. Testing all of us. There was one folder in particular that made my fingers go numb. It was labeled Control Group, Stage for Proximity Blend. Inside were surveillance photos, but not taken from afar like the others. These were up close, almost intimate. Someone had followed me. Someone had taken pictures of me at the grocery store, at my old gym, leaving my dentist's office, even waiting at the bus stop I used to use back when the Corolla broke down. And it wasn't just me. Next to each photo was a set of notes. Detailed, methodical breakdowns of my posture, my expression, whether or not I checked my phone, how often I looked up from my surroundings. Each note ended with a number. Most were between 40 and 65. One was labeled Spike, 89. The note underneath read, Subject uncharacteristically aggressive during perceived betrayal stimulus. Repeat scene twice before next stage. It took me a full minute to realize what that note referred to. The day I found a text on Darla's phone from someone named Mads, with a photo attached of her smiling in a car I didn't recognize. I had confronted her. She claimed it was a joke, said Mads was short for Madison, a coworker. I had believed her. Well, no. I chose to believe her, because the alternative meant ripping open something I wasn't ready to see. But now I understood. That wasn't an accident. That was a stimulus. A test. And I had passed. Or failed. I didn't even know which anymore. The worst part? I started wondering how much of my life had been choreographed. The dinners we had. The arguments. The way she used to cry during certain movies. The sudden personality shifts. Her phase where she got into dream journals. Her brief obsession with color psychology. Even our initial meeting. Had that been spontaneous? Or had I been selected? It felt insane to even think it. And yet here I was, staring at files that read like the episode notes of a psychological drama, where I was the punchline. I took photos of everything I could. My phone was at 12%, and I didn't want to risk taking the originals. Something told me that if anyone realized this cabin had been accessed, there'd be consequences, not legal ones, but something quieter. Like I'd simply stop being found. Or remembered. I left the folders exactly where I found them. Notebook closed, table untouched. Then I locked the door on my way out, even though it hadn't been locked when I arrived. On the drive home, I kept trying to tell myself this had to be some kind of art project. Maybe Darla was working on a screenplay, something immersive, some warped performance piece. She had always been the creative one. But even that theory fell apart when I remembered the time-stamped photos of people she couldn't have known. Some of them were dated before she ever met me. Others were recent, too recent. And then came the text. I was 40 minutes from home when my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Unknown number. You shouldn't have opened the drawer. That was it. No name. No emojis. No threats. Just a sentence. Cold. Familiar in tone. It felt just like the one she said at dinner. I didn't reply. I didn't even breathe for a few seconds. I just stared at the screen until the display went dark. When I finally got back to the apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the kitchen with a glass of water I didn't drink, my mind racing through every interaction, every missed detail, every moment I had chalked up to chance, or mood, or bad timing. And one question kept drilling deeper and deeper into the center of my skull. Who the hell is Subject A1? Because every file I'd seen, every subject, every folder, had been labeled alphabetically and numerically. But there was nothing marked A1. Just a gap. A missing page. And I was starting to suspect that A1 wasn't someone else. It might have been me. 3 days passed. 3 full days without sleep, without answers, without seeing her. I don't know where Darla went. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her job said she was on approved personal leave. Her apartment, the one I hadn't stepped foot in since that night at dinner, was locked and dark every time I drove by. But I knew she wasn't gone. Not really. You don't vanish when you're the one pulling the strings. You retreat. You recalibrate. The only reason I didn't lose my mind entirely was because I kept rereading the file names I photographed. I started making a list. A spreadsheet, if you can believe it. I started tracking names, places, pattern codes, anything I could pull from those folders. I even started color-coding the names by recognition. Green for strangers, yellow for vague familiarity, red for people I had interacted with. There were too many reds. And then there was the gray column, names partially blacked out in my photos. One of those names kept resurfacing across multiple files. It appeared next to entries labeled Control Override, Narrative Reversal, and one folder marked Only. SC. Protocol Interruption, Status Unknown. SC. Subject 0. The implication sat on my chest like a weight. If every person in this project, or whatever it was, had a number, and I was possibly a 1, then who the hell was 0? The architect? The anomaly? The original? I started searching the only way I could, through forums, Reddit threads, and bizarre message boards that barely loaded on modern browsers. I typed phrases from the documents: proximity blend, mirror memory recital, behavioral sculpting. Most turned up nothing. But one thread, buried deep in a philosophy board disguised as a dream analysis group, had a post from 2021 titled, "If you remember the script, you were never the actor." That phrase hit me like a punch. It was something Darla had once said to me, almost jokingly, when I flubbed the words to a wedding toast at her cousin's reception. I'd laughed it off at the time. But now, seeing it posted by someone using the name Echo Cycle, along with a blurry photo of a cabin that looked almost identical to the one I had broken into, I knew I had to message them. It took a full 24 hours before I got a response. "Echo Cycle, you weren't supposed to see the red watch." Just like that. Not hi. Not who are you. Just a direct acknowledgement of the detail I hadn't posted anywhere. My skin went cold. I asked them who they were. I asked them if they knew Darla. The reply came minutes later. "Echo Cycle, I was her before she was her." I stared at the screen, unsure whether to feel terror or exhaustion. I asked them to explain. What followed was a long message, broken into fragments like someone trying not to be followed, even online. They told me they were part of the early structure. That before it became the performance, it was a trial, a pilot program run by a group with no name, just patterns. They didn't brainwash you. They didn't implant memories. They used what you gave them, your fears, your routines, your quiet thoughts. They studied your reactions and fed them back to you in rehearsed, artificial forms, like mirrors held slightly off angle, until you didn't recognize your own reflection anymore. They called it emotional cartography, mapping out a person's soul like a city grid, learning which streets led to guilt, which to desire, which to silence. Each partner was a sculptor trained to manipulate those maps, to push and pull the narrative until the subject either awakened or fractured. Then Echo Cycle said something I still can't shake. If you're asking questions, you're already outside the map. But if she let you get there, it means you weren't just a subject. You were a control. A control? That word had shown up in the notebook too. Under my photo. Control. I pressed them. What does that mean? What is a control in their world? Their response. It means your reactions were used to calibrate everyone else's. And that's when the final piece started clicking. All those men. The ones in the photos. The dinner scenes. The staged betrayals. Maybe they weren't for her at all. Maybe she wasn't collecting emotional data for herself. Maybe she was testing me through them. They were the variables. I was the constant. My heartbreak, my confusion, my forgiveness. All of it had been measured, refined, and repackaged. She didn't just manipulate me. She built herself using me. And worse, she probably wasn't the only one who had. I asked Echo Cycle where she was now. If Darla was still active, still part of the program. I waited 20 minutes for the reply. She graduated, but she left a breach in the cycle. I asked what that meant. No answer. Instead, a final message came through, 5 minutes later. One sentence, no punctuation. Check the back of your wedding photo. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to chalk it up to paranoia or elaborate trolling. But at 2:37 in the morning, I got out of bed, pulled the dusty photo frame off the shelf where I hadn't touched it in over a year, and turned it over. There, pressed behind the cardboard backing, was a second photo, smaller, folded twice, nearly invisible unless you were looking for it. It was a picture of me, taken from across the street, dated 3 months before I met her. I stared at the hidden photo for what felt like hours. Not because I couldn't process it, but because I already had. That was the terrifying part, the recognition. The clothes I was wearing in the photo, the bag I was holding, the expression on my face as I crossed the street. I remembered that day. Or at least, I thought I did. It was raining. Lightly. I had been on my way to meet an old friend who flaked on me at the last second. I ended up sitting alone at a cafe downtown, watching strangers through fogged windows, thinking I was the only lonely person in the room. But the photo, it was from that same moment. Same day, same jacket, same bag. Only now, with this photo in my hand, I realized I had never asked how I ended up at that cafe. I'd never even thought about it. The decision to go there had felt casual, random. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was written into a scene. What if the day we met, the spontaneous run-in at the bookstore, the awkward banter, the shared laugh about the spilled coffee, what if that wasn't fate? What if it was her entrance cue? I sat on the floor of my apartment with every framed memory pulled from the walls. Birthday dinners, anniversary trips, a blurry photo of us sitting on a dock in Vermont, her head on my shoulder, mine tilted back laughing at something I couldn't recall. I pulled them all apart. Every frame, every backplate, every layer of false nostalgia. I found 3 more hidden photos. All of me, different angles, different years, all dated before I ever knew her. She had been watching me, or someone had, maybe even before she ever introduced herself. And the strangest thing? In every photo, I looked happy. Not staged happy, genuinely at ease. Relaxed. Like someone who had no idea he was already part of something much larger. That made me wonder, was I ever actually happy? Or did they just catch the right angles? I couldn't sleep again that night. Instead, I sat with my laptop open, combing through old emails, texts, and message threads with Darla, looking for patterns, repetitions. I found phrases she had used more than once, word for word, months apart, in totally different emotional contexts. You always look surprised when people stay. I love the way you try to fix things you didn't break. Do you think people are born lonely, or do they just rot into it? These weren't things she said. They were lines. Then I found the audio file. It was tucked inside a forgotten folder in our shared cloud drive, just labeled Scene 7, Cut B. I clicked it, expecting maybe a voice note or something she'd recorded for a project. But it wasn't her voice. It was mine. My voice, reading from a script. Stiff. Unnatural. Hesitant. I said her name. I said phrases I barely remembered. I said things I hadn't known I'd ever said. Some were awkward. Some were painful. One part had me reading an apology, word for word identical to something I had told her the night she cried after a fake pregnancy scare. Only that had been real, hadn't it? Hadn't it? I rewound the audio, listened again, and then I realized I wasn't just reading it. I was performing it. Like I'd done it before. Like someone had fed me the lines. I closed the laptop and felt like the floor under me wasn't stable anymore. I didn't know what time it was. I didn't care. I went into the closet and pulled out the old shoebox, the one that started everything, the one with the Polaroids. There were fewer photos in it than I remembered. That's when the dread kicked in again. Someone had been here. I scrambled to the back of the closet and yanked the storage bin down, the one labeled winter gear. Inside, hidden beneath scarves and gloves, I found the duffel I'd brought to the cabin. It was unzipped. I didn't leave it that way. Inside, the spiral notebook from the cabin had been returned. But it wasn't how I left it. Pages were missing. Others had been added. In handwriting I didn't recognize. There was a new scene labeled, Final Confrontation, A1 Activation. I started reading. The first few lines were hers. Then mine. Then hers again. And then, A1, what if I wasn't real? Subject, then I loved a ghost. A1, and if I never loved you? Subject, then I was the ghost. I didn't understand. Not completely. But something deep in my chest knew this wasn't a new scene. It hadn't been written for the future. It had already happened. Somewhere. Sometime. And I was just now remembering it. I didn't go looking for Darla after that. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the need to chase shadows or dig for truth like it was buried treasure. Because after reading that final script, after hearing my own voice perform emotions that were supposed to be spontaneous, I finally understood what had been haunting me. It wasn't her betrayal. It wasn't the program. It wasn't even the manipulation. It was that I had let my identity become a reaction to someone else's performance. I was a mirror, and mirrors don't get to decide who they are. They only reflect what's in front of them. So I stopped reflecting. I spent the next 2 weeks detaching from everything. Deleted the cloud drive. Burned the shoebox. Cleared my inbox. I didn't do it out of paranoia. I did it because I didn't want my life to be an archive anymore. I wanted it to be a blank page. Not a script. Not a test. Just empty. With space to breathe. I moved to a new apartment on the east side. Nothing fancy. A studio above a bakery that smells like cinnamon rolls at 6 a.m. The landlord gave me a deal because the ceiling leaks a little in the corner during heavy rain. I don't mind. It reminds me that the world isn't perfectly built, that it's okay to be flawed, to let things drip. I got a bike. Started riding again. Took a beginner's pottery class at a local rec center because I wanted to make something ugly and honest with my hands. My first mug was misshapen and cracked at the handle. I drink from it every morning. I also started writing. Not scripts. Not journal entries. Just letters. To people I'll never send them to. My father. Old friends. The version of me that once thought love meant becoming whatever the other person needed. I write to him a lot. Last week, I was standing in line at the hardware store when someone tapped me on the shoulder. A woman, probably late 20s, hoodie and paint-streaked jeans. She smiled awkwardly and said, "Hey, I think I sat next to you in that pottery class." We talked for 5 minutes. Maybe 7. About nothing important. Glazed types. How the instructor reminds everyone of a cartoon turtle. She asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime. I said yes. But not because I was lonely. Not because I was looking for someone to fill a script. Because I finally felt off book. She doesn't know about Darla. She doesn't know about Subject A1 or the cabin or the staged dinner or the man with the red watch. Maybe someday I'll tell her. Maybe not. Because the truth is, what happened to me doesn't need to define me. I'm not a file. I'm not a case study. I'm not a variable. I'm just a man who walked away from a table one night, without saying a word, and kept walking, all the way back to himself. And if that's not real, I don't care. It's mine.